Now, one of the next most common questions we get, and this is how much should I spend on my marketing, or how much should I invest into our marketing budget in order for us to start seeing results? And generally, this is going to be directly proportionate to your customer value. So naturally, the goal for any business with their marketing efforts is you want to make sure that you can find or get a cost per acquisition that is lower than your customer value. Now, it is worth saying that for some businesses, if you know that you make a lot of your customer value on the back end, so for example, whether you run a dental practice, whether you have a subscription business, or if you have an e-com store where a lot of those sales come over the lifetime value of the customer, you may actually be able to afford to acquire customers at break even, or some businesses even acquire customers at a loss because they are confident in their metrics and they know that that can be made up on the back end. And that's where you may hear terms like CAC payback period. So how long is it going to take you to recoup that cost per acquisition, so then everything on the back end is profit. However, that can be a risky strategy if you're a newer business or startup and you don't really know about those metrics yet. But in a nutshell, this is going to be, again, proportionate to your customer value. So naturally, let's say if you're selling a product or service for £500,000, there's not going to be as many buyers out there who are investing at that level. You would also expect for something like that to have a much more longer and complex buying cycle. Maybe there's multiple stakeholders or decision makers involved in that buying process. So naturally, you would expect to spend much more and for it to take longer to actually start seeing results and even acquiring leads for that kind of business or that kind of product or service. On the other hand, if you're an e-com store and you're selling something for just £50 or $50, you would expect the buying cycle, for one, to be much shorter, but also, again, that cost per acquisition is going to be proportionate to the value of that customer. Now, if you are an e-com store, it might be that you have a lifetime value of that customer of about £200 or $200. But again, the cost per acquisition for you, realistically, in order for you to make money, needs to be within that customer value. So it's generally always going to be proportionate. The next thing you need to factor in is going to be the costs of the platform that you're advertising on. So the CPMs, your cost per impressions, but also the CPCs of that platform, i.e. the cost per click, because this is then going to give you a good indication of how many customers can you actually reach, how much traffic can you actually drive for the audience that you're trying to get in front of. And that is then going to affect naturally the budget that you actually need to invest. For example, if you're in an industry or you're selling to a target audience where the cost per clicks are £50 or £60, there's no point you having a £500 or even £1,000 advertising budget, because you're only going to be generating maybe 10, 20, 30 visitors a month to your website. So it's going to be very, very difficult and take a very long time to get any significant data in to be able to optimize or course correct on those campaigns. So generally, when we have our initial discovery calls together with clients, we'll be looking at all these metrics and doing the research so we can then give you some expectations in terms of what budget we would recommend investing in the campaign in order to realistically test or optimize those over time. Generally though, for any clients we're working with, we would recommend at least £1,000 or $1,000 a month as a starting point at absolute minimum. Now, there are some industries where, again, you might have a very low customer value, you might have very low CPCs and CPMs, and actually be able to get away with a lower budget. But at that stage, we generally wouldn't recommend working with an agency because the unit economics just don't stack up. By the time you've paid our management fee, you're then eating significantly into your profits. So if you are selling a much lower value product or lower value service, you're just starting advertising for the first time, probably not going to make sense for you to be working with an agency. However, if you are a more established brand or you're selling a very high value product or service, that's where we can begin to help. But again, we would recommend at absolute minimum £1,000, but this is going to vary by your industry, by your customer value, and by your target audience.